I kept hearing Robert's voice every time I opened a pen that wasn't his. The click of the cap, the quiet resistance of a fresh page, it always brought him back. Not loudly, just there in the small fold between habit and memory. His fountain pen, black with a hairline crack at the cap, had stayed in the right-hand drawer since the funeral. I hadn't touched it. Not once. It didn't feel right, even though it was mine now, like so many things. Nathan had brought a new pen, sleek, weightless, impersonal. The kind of pen used for real estate closings, car leases, shared bank accounts. Emily set it on the desk as if placing a dessert fork beside a slice of something you didn't ask for, but were expected to finish. "You don't even need to read it," she said. "It's just the paperwork. Formally, the bank needs your name, that's all." She didn't sit down. Her voice hovered at the same pitch she used when telling me she'd already ordered dinner or that I'd probably find that sweater too heavy. Nathan added from somewhere behind me, "Your signature's the last piece. We've done everything else. This just wraps it up." The documents had been pre-tabbed with red stickers. Sign here, initial, date. No margin notes, no explanations, just movement. The folder was navy blue, heavier than I expected. My name was printed on the front in a serif font that didn't quite match the house. Guarantor Sylvia A. Whitmore. Robert would have made a comment about the typeface. Something dry, almost affectionate. I heard him clearly. Funny how they always make it look elegant even when they're stealing your name. I didn't laugh. Emily placed a cup of tea beside the folder. I could smell the citrus, probably the one she knew I never liked but kept offering. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and shifted her weight from one foot to the other. "You trust us, right?" She didn't wait for an answer. That was the answer. The chair creaked as I leaned forward. The desk was the one Robert and I had bought secondhand when he first opened his consulting office. We'd sanded it together on a weekend, staining the wood to match the darker panels in the living room. There was still a nick near the corner from where Robert had dropped the stapler one night after too much wine and too little sleep. He said it gave the desk character. I signed the first page. Slowly. Clean letters, slanting slightly right. The ink didn't smudge. I lifted the pen and signed the second, then the third, then initialed the small box with my left hand resting flat on the wood as if steadying myself. No one spoke. Nathan leaned over to collect the pages. He smoothed them with his palm like he was sealing something that could wrinkle. "Appreciate this," he said. "Seriously." Emily smiled almost offhand. "We'll never forget it." They left the tea. They took the folder. I sat there longer than necessary looking at the spot where the pen had rested. There was a faint indentation in the wood. Not from today, older, shallow-shaped like a ring. Maybe from Robert's wedding band. Maybe from one of the ceramic coasters we always forgot to use. The room was quiet again. No one asked if I wanted to keep a copy. No one offered one. I folded my hands together and looked at the small stack of envelopes on the desk corner. One from the power company, one from the local library, and one with no return address. All unopened. They'd been sitting there since Thursday. Maybe longer. There was a cardigan draped over the back of the chair, mine, charcoal a little stretched in the sleeves, one button missing. I'd meant to sew it last winter, then didn't. I slipped it on slowly, not for warmth, just to feel weight on my shoulders. When I stood, my knees clicked faintly, and I pressed my palm to the edge of the desk to steady myself. My fingers brushed the right-hand drawer, the one that still held Robert's pen, his notary stamp, and 3 foreign coins we never used but never threw away. I opened it halfway. The pen was still there, tucked in its velvet-lined case, with the cracked hinge. A single thread of ink had dried in the cap long ago. I didn't touch it. On the windowsill above the desk sat a small glass bowl with 5 paper clips, a loose button, and 1 dried sprig of lavender. I'd put it there the day after the service. Emily once asked why I didn't throw it out. "It's just dead now," she'd said. But it still held its shape. And sometimes in the right light, the purple almost returned. The cup of tea had gone cold, untouched. I carried it to the sink and poured it slowly, watching the liquid circle the drain in quiet spirals. The porcelain clinked gently when I set it down. A thin film of citrus oil floated on the surface, catching light briefly before it vanished. I wiped my hands on the hem of my cardigan. The fabric was thinning, but I liked how it held creases. I returned to the desk, looked again at the spot where I'd signed. The pen was gone. The imprint remained. There had been no discussion about what would happen if something failed. No clauses read aloud, no pause between pages. They hadn't asked how I was. I hadn't offered. And yet my name sat there now in a digital system somewhere guaranteeing something I hadn't seen and couldn't control. I didn't call anyone afterward. I didn't write it down. I didn't mention it later that week when Emily texted a photo of the new kitchen backsplash. I didn't ask questions that day because I thought trust, quiet, clean, unquestioned was still enough. I always made too much dessert. Not out of habit, but because silence doesn't eat. The pears were soft enough to cut with the back of a spoon. I'd glazed them with rosemary and a trickle of honey just the way Emily used to prefer before she stopped saying what she liked. I wrapped the dish in a cotton towel and carried it to the car with both hands, like something breakable. I didn't drive fast. I never do when the food is warm. There were cars already lined down the block. One of them had balloons tied to the side mirror. I parked farther away, not minding the walk. The front door was open, just a crack. Laughter spilled out not in bursts, but as a steady hum, like a room that didn't need me to begin with. I pressed the bell once, softly. No one came. I stepped in and waited just inside the hallway, holding the dish. Emily passed by, turning back only slightly. "Oh, hi. You came. That's sweet." She looked at the dish. I thought she might take it. She didn't. "We've got plenty already, but you can put it somewhere in the kitchen." The living room was full. Folding chairs, paper plates, a slow jazz playlist, trying to sound like it belonged. Nathan stood by the window, holding court with 3 men I didn't know. Someone was pouring white wine into tumblers. Emily's voice came again from behind her shoulder. "Mi chắc không thích ồn ào kiểu này mà phải không?" I turned toward the dining table. It had been extended with the leaves I gave her last winter. A long, unwrinkled cloth draped to the floor on all sides, bright white, ironed with care. There were 10 seats, every one of them occupied or marked with a place card. None with my name. I stepped back. My heel tapped the edge of the kitchen door. I set the pears down on a sideboard. Someone had placed a foil-covered tray of deviled eggs there next to a cake still in its plastic container. I unwrapped my dish anyway. The aroma rose gently. Sweet, softened fruit cloves and browned butter. The kind of scent that fills without intruding. I stepped away from it, not looking back. I heard Nathan laugh across the room. "That's what I keep telling her, your mom would love this kitchen if she still cooked." The guest chuckled politely. Emily's mother-in-law stood near the sink, swirling her drink lipstick sharp and unbothered. A child, maybe 7, reached up and tugged at her sleeve. "Grandma, I need help with the robot game." She turned and followed him without hesitation. I heard the word again. "Grandma," but no one looked toward me. In the hallway, I reached for my phone, half by instinct. The family group chat used to ping regularly updates baby photos, Emily's grocery victories, Nathan's promotions. The last notification I remembered was over 3 weeks ago. I opened the thread. It wasn't there. Instead, there was a new one. The Caldwells. A dozen messages from earlier today. See you at 5. Don't forget the cheese board. We'll bring the wine. All signed with names I knew, none of which were mine. I tapped the screen and held it. Nothing happened. From the dining room, someone clinked a glass. Nathan raised his voice. Here's to chosen families and to the house that finally feels like home. Applause. 2 people cheered louder than the rest. I stood by the wall, the trim slightly chipped near the baseboard. I used to run Emily's stroller along these edges, careful not to scuff the new paint. Now the marks had faded or been painted over. No trace of my paths. My chair, if it existed, wasn't among the 10. I walked past the table slowly. A woman I didn't recognize looked up, offered a tight smile, then returned to her conversation. No one moved a chair. No one shifted. I walked to the far side of the kitchen. The pears remained untouched, the glaze beginning to dull at the edges. I pressed one fingertip into the towel I'd wrapped them in. The fabric had cooled. Someone tapped a glass with a fork. Emily's voice rose. We just want to thank everyone who's been part of this chapter. It's meant the world. The woman beside her raised her wine. To the ones who show up. They all drank. I leaned slightly against the counter, careful not to touch the dish. The towel had a small brown thread coming loose from the seam. I rubbed it between my fingers until it broke. In the pantry doorway, a boy peeked out, maybe a cousin's son. Hey, there's no forks in here. Emily's mother-in-law pointed toward the drawer. Check the one next to the fridge, sweetheart. She turned her head. Some folks just put things wherever, don't they? The boy laughed. I stepped back into the corner past the edge of the countertop. A framed photo leaned on the shelf. Emily, in her graduation robe, Nathan beside her, and me cropped by the frame. I don't remember that photo being taken. Or maybe I do, but differently. I took one last look at the pears. The syrup had slid into a corner of the dish. One edge of the fruit browned more than the others. I knew how long that would sit untouched until someone decided to scrape it into a bin. But I didn't wrap it again. I didn't move it closer. I didn't speak. The table was long enough for 10, covered in white. Nothing on it had my name. I used to believe that paper couldn't lie, that what's written ink on texture held something sacred. I was looking for a broth recipe Robert had emailed years ago. It was winter then, and he'd typed it up because I'd misplaced the handwritten one again. He always believed the small things deserved permanence. The email subject line was something like, Mushroom Miracle. I never found that email, but as I scrolled through the older threads, there was a line that didn't belong. Confirmation of share adjustment, Whitmore Family Trust. It wasn't addressed to me. The text began mid-sentence, like I had been CC'd by mistake or ghosted in via an old thread. I almost deleted it thinking it was a newsletter, but the words Sylvia Whitmore appeared too precisely. As of June 4th, administrative rights are formally transitioned from Sylvia L. Whitmore to Nathaniel D. Caldwell. No request, no inquiry, no mention of my involvement. Just a past tense verdict. Attached was a PDF titled Authorized Transfer Statement. I stared at the screen long enough for it to dim. There wasn't a moment of panic. I simply stood up and walked to the living room cabinet where Robert's documents still lived. The cabinet creaked, as it always had, its right hinge looser than the left. I never asked anyone to fix it. The folder was thicker than I remembered. Cream-colored pages, a notary seal pressed into the front sheet. His handwriting, still the same narrow slope, filled the margins with questions, formulas, arrows. On the 5th page, I found my name. Co-administrator Sylvia L. Whitmore. He had underlined it in green. Green was his habit. He said red was too final. I placed the original beside the printed version of the email. The difference was immediate. The new document bore no ink, no trace of us. just blocks of serifed font and sterile formatting. Beneath the new signature line read, "Effective upon digital confirmation. Executed by alternate authority." No indication of who granted the alternate authority. No reason given. I didn't call Emily. I didn't forward the email. I didn't even ask who gave permission. Instead, I opened the attachment. It was quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like it's listening. The PDF had a footnote approved by Mutual Financial Counsel. Documentation archived. But there was no mention of my voice in that archive. I remembered the morning Robert first drafted the trust. He had made coffee and spilled a few drops on the corner of the template. The stain dried into the shape of a comma. It's still there. I checked. My phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. "Hey, Mom! If you see anything weird from the bank, don't worry. Just clearing up some back-end stuff. Nathan handled it already." Another ping. "We had to streamline a few things for tax purposes. You're still totally a part of it, of course. Totally a part of it." I folded the message back into the silence. When she was 13, Emily once left a note in my coat pocket after we argued about curfew. It read, "I'm still your daughter even if I'm mad." I kept that note in my wallet for 10 years. It faded until only the word still remained visible. I opened the drawer in the study and took out a manila envelope marked Whitmore Legal Originals. Inside were the old notarized copies. I laid one down, then the other. One page was signed with a fountain pen, its ink slightly feathered at the edges. The new one had no pen at all, just a stylized signature that looked printed. I looked at the line labeled Current Administrator, Nathan Caldwell. Below mine, Sylvia Whitmore, inactive. Inactive. I hadn't been informed of that transition. On the back of the page, in small print, I noticed the word revoked. There was no date, no initials, just a quiet removal of presence. The word sat there neither angry nor apologetic, just final. When I was younger, I once lost my name briefly after marriage. The DMV misspelled it as Silva. I corrected it eventually, but the license remained in a drawer for years. Its error felt oddly prophetic. This felt similar, only now the misspelling wasn't phonetic. It was structural. I flipped back to Robert's version. On the lower margin of the last page, he had written, "No administrator shall be changed without joint approval, notarized in person." The margin note ended with a check mark. I placed a yellow sticky note on that page, just a blank square pressed gently into the corner. Not to annotate, only to mark that I had seen it again. I returned to the kitchen. The coffee mug beside the sink still had yesterday's ring inside it. A fine brown outline, perfectly unbroken. I thought of calling the attorney, but the need dissolved before it formed. When Emily was 11, she once asked if a signature meant forever. I told her it meant you were there. And now my name remained on the document, but I was no longer there. They always said silence meant agreement. I started wondering if silence could also mean withdrawal. The message blinked quietly on the phone screen. "Mom, need one more quick signature, bank's asking for an update. Nothing big." I turned the phone face down. The screen lit up again, but made no sound. Robert once said that protecting something didn't always look like holding it close. Sometimes it meant pulling away. I didn't understand him then. I opened the desk drawer and took out the small ledger, leather-bound soft from years of touch. It had belonged to Robert, used mostly to keep grocery lists and reminders. I never erased his penciled notes. That morning, I opened it to a blank page. On the left, I wrote the date. On the right, I wrote the words from the text message. Request, signature for account update, underlined it once. I signed nothing. I logged into the joint account Robert and I once opened for emergencies, the one with both our names, a small account but one he'd always called the safety valve. Nathan's name had been added 2 years ago. At the time, it felt like preparation. Now it looked like placement. I removed him. There was no alert, no email sent to him automatically. Just a single toggle, and then his access vanished. I stared at the confirmation screen not out of fear, but to memorize the feeling of not asking first. I changed the iCloud password next, then the wireless plan. I updated the name on the electric bill, not to hide, only to anchor something in place again. Later that week, a voicemail from Emily. "Hey, Mom, did you get the tax document I sent over? We need to finalize that filing before end of quarter. No, how are you?" No pause for my breath. I texted back, "Still considering." She didn't respond. Robert's pen was still in the drawer, a gold one heavy. I clicked it once, then set it beside the notebook. It was never a tool he used casually. He used to say, "Some pens are only for decisions." I flipped the page and started a new entry. March 14th, request to approve amended tax documents. Beneath it, pending. I didn't need to call. Writing it down was enough. A few days later, Nathan's voice came through the speaker. "Mom, are you avoiding the trust paperwork? It's routine. I already cleared it with the advisors." The advisors, not me. I stood at the kitchen counter, hands around a chipped mug. The glaze had worn at the rim, where Robert's mouth had always met the porcelain. I never drank from that side. I placed the mug back into the sink, turned off the voicemail, and walked to the closet where Robert's coat still hung. Inside the pocket was a folded napkin he once wrote a number on it during an insurance call. Faint blue ink. The paper had softened from years of being untouched. I used to believe I was guarding what we built, but lately it felt like they'd built a new structure and left my name on the foundation out of habit, not intention. I sat again at the small desk and opened to the third page in the notebook. March 18th, inquiry from Nathan regarding investment transfer. I added no response below it. That space remained empty. Robert had once told me, the moment you're treated like a formality, stop handing over your signature. I hadn't understood him then. I hadn't needed to. Now I wrote his words beneath the date, slow and careful, as if they were not only his, but mine to keep. I got another email. Subject authorization needed. 529 college fund. Emily had attached a link with the button "Sign Now." No greeting, no context, just that directive. I didn't click it. Instead, I returned to the notebook and recorded it. March 20th, request to sign 529 authorization form. Then beneath it, no action taken. The pages were starting to carry weight. Not legal weight, just presence. They reminded me of who had asked what had been expected, and when I had chosen not to comply quietly. I didn't share the notebook with anyone. I didn't write in anger. Just dates and phrases kept in sequence like stones marking a path. When Emily called that Sunday, her voice came through, filtered and low. "Are you okay? You've been quiet." Quiet meant useful, once. Then, "You're not making this harder for no reason, right?" That went into the notebook too. March 23rd, call from Emily. I didn't transcribe her words. I simply wrote, tone noted. In the corner of the same page, I drew a small square. Inside it, I placed a dot. The square was the perimeter. The dot was me. They hadn't removed me entirely. They'd simply made the walls bigger until I could barely touch the edges anymore. On the last line of the page, I wrote in small script, I used to believe I was part of the structure. Now I see I was the ink at the bottom of the page. I used to think photographs made memories last longer. But maybe they only mark the places where we've been quietly erased. I held the frame between my hands the way some people carry flowers to a cemetery, gently, without expectation. It was the one of Robert and me taken on the Oregon coast, when our hair was darker and our shoulders still touched easily in a frame. I had polished the glass the night before. There was still a streak I'd missed near his collarbone. Emily opened the door with one hand while finishing a conversation on her phone. "Oh, it's just Mom," she said into the speaker, then stepped aside. "Come in. We've got piles everywhere. Ignore the mess." I nodded. My hands remained wrapped around the wooden frame as I stepped over a pair of cleats and a yoga mat curled like a sleeping dog near the hallway. The living room was bright, curated. On the mantel sat a photo from Emily and Nathan's anniversary in Bermuda. On the wall, a canvas collage of the kids, pumpkin patches, birthday hats, first days of school. I scanned slowly, shelf by shelf. Not a single photo of Robert. Not even one of me. "I brought this for the guest room," I said, setting the frame down on the sideboard. "Just something old." Emily barely looked. "We actually turned that room into Nathan's workout space. There's still a pullout in the office if you need to rest." I didn't. She walked ahead of me into the kitchen, where Nathan was blending something green and foamy. "You know, Mom," Emily called out, "you were never much into decorating with pictures, right? You always kept things minimalist." I didn't answer. The frame stayed behind on the sideboard untouched. They had invited me for a casual dinner. Nothing fancy, they said. I brought a box of herbal tea and a small jar of preserves, both unopened, when I left. At the table, Nathan spoke animatedly about a new real estate opportunity. Emily's voice floated in and out of conversations like background music. My name didn't come up once. When I tried to ask the twins about school, they looked toward their parents for permission, then returned to their tablets. Halfway through the meal, Emily's youngest leaned toward her grandmother, Nathan's mother, and whispered something. I caught only fragments. Ballet class Grandma Caldwell's car cookies on Fridays. Then she looked at me. "Are you her sister?" The room hushed slightly. Emily laughed too quickly. "No, sweetie. This is Grandma Sylvia. You've met her before." The child nodded, but turned back to her plate without another word. I glanced at the framed artwork above the dining table. It used to hang in my own foyer, a watercolor I had painted years ago. Emily must have taken it when she moved. My initials in the bottom corner were almost faded into the beige paper. No one mentioned the tea I brought, or the preserves. After dinner, I offered to help with dishes. Emily waved me off. "Go relax, Mom. You don't need to do the heavy lifting anymore." I stood for a moment in the kitchen doorway, listening to the sound of running water, the soft clink of plates. The photo frame still sat on the sideboard, just slightly crooked now. No one had moved it or asked where it came from. I left without saying much. The hallway light flickered faintly behind me. No one walked me to the door. Back home, I placed the frame face down in a drawer. Then I opened another drawer, the one in my bedroom I hadn't touched in weeks. Inside lay the folded handkerchief with lace edges slightly yellowed with age. My mother's initials still embroidered in one corner. She had given it to me on the day I brought Emily home from the hospital. For when words won't work, she'd said, "This will do." I pressed the cloth flat on my lap, smoothing out the corners. I had not cried. I had not raised my voice. I had simply disappeared from their walls. Later that night, I walked through each room in my house. I counted 6 framed photos of Emily, 2 of Robert, 1 of my mother, and 1 of me barely visible in the corner of a picnic shot, holding a paper plate with both hands. No one had ever asked for those copies. No one had offered to borrow them. I picked up a small, sticky note that had fallen behind the clock. On it, Emily had written, "Don't forget, Mom likes chamomile, not mint." The ink had faded, but the word Mom was still intact. I slipped it into the same drawer as the handkerchief, not out of nostalgia, just to keep things that still remembered my name. Sometimes presence is a quiet thing, not in voice, not in motion, but in the fabric of the space that once held you. I folded the handkerchief again and placed it squarely in the center of the drawer. That night, I didn't turn any lights on in the hallway. I let the dark hold everything exactly where it was. And I didn't reach for the frame. I never liked the sound of my name spoken through a speakerphone. It flattens everything: intonation, intention, history. Mrs. Whitmore, we need your signature to complete the refinancing process for the Caldwell residence. The voice had a rehearsed politeness, a softness meant for clients who still mattered. I paused before responding. What account is this regarding? A shuffle of papers. The one previously tied to the joint equity agreement from 2019. The documentation was co-signed by a Mr. Nathan Caldwell and a Mrs. Sylvia Whitmore. I didn't ask who gave them my number. I already knew. The bank wouldn't have called without someone offering it freely. I didn't hang up either. I just let the line stay open until they said, "We'll email the documents again for your review." The envelope arrived the next day, too thick for something called a quick signature. I didn't open it right away. I placed it beside a chipped mug that still sat by the sink. Robert used to drink from it in the mornings when he read the business section aloud, whether I asked for updates or not. The mug had a sliver missing near the rim. I'd never thrown it away. Later, when I slid the documents out, they were warm from the sun that crept through the kitchen blinds. Everything was pre-filled. All I had to do was sign again. Just like before. The space for my name waited printed in bold near the bottom. I reread the phrasing 3 times. Guarantor affirms liability in full until asset maturity or transfer. It sounded more like surrender than support. I left it on the table and called Emily. She answered quickly this time. "Hey, Mom. Oh, did the papers come? I told her they had. I asked why no one mentioned a second mortgage or that my name was still listed." Her reply came without hesitation. "It's not a big deal. Just formalities. You know how banks are." A pause hung between us. Then she added, "You've always helped us with these things. This isn't any different." I looked at the signature line again. Same font, same positioning, same assumption. "I'll need some time," I said. A silence I hadn't heard from her before followed. Then clipped and low, Nathan said, "You might make it complicated." I ended the call without responding. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. I simply placed the phone face down and picked up a pen, but not to sign. I opened the old notebook Robert used to keep in his nightstand. The one with leather too soft to be new and corners softened by years of turning. I hadn't written in it since he passed, but the first few pages still held his tall handwriting, itemized plans, reminders, passwords in code only he could decipher. I started a new page and drew a line down the center. On the left, I wrote the date. On the right, I wrote refinancing request. No prior discussion. Signature expected. I flipped back to one of Robert's entries. March 12th, 2002. Shared assets require shared respect. I traced over it with my finger, not to memorize it, but to remember the tone he'd used when he said it aloud that spring standing by the backyard hose. Emily called again that evening. I didn't answer. Her message was brief. "They'll need that signed by Friday, Mom. Otherwise, the rate expires." The paper stayed on the table. The mug beside it caught a line of morning light the next day. I washed it slowly and set it back down. A few days passed before another number flashed on my screen, Nathan this time. He didn't greet me. "We're kind of in a bind here. It's just one form. I don't get why this is taking so long." I didn't answer immediately. I walked to the cabinet, took down the envelope, and flipped through the pages again while he waited. Then calm, "I'm not ready to sign." A short laugh came through the line, dry and edged. "You always used to be the easy one." I hung up. I didn't call back. I didn't explain. I didn't even tear the documents. I folded them once sharply and slid them back into the envelope. I wrote pending across the seal and left it near the back door beside the grocery list I hadn't updated in 2 weeks. Later, I sat with the notebook again. 2 new entries. May 9th, verbal pressure from both. Pushed for urgency without context, May 10th. Their emergency isn't my obligation. I pressed the pen into the page a little too hard. The dot it left bled slightly into the line below. There was a knock at the door the next afternoon. No call ahead. I opened it to find Emily holding a Tupperware of something warm. I figured we could talk in person. You don't have to be so distant. She set the container down on the counter without waiting for permission. We're not trying to exclude you. You're just making things harder than they have to be. I didn't invite her to sit. She didn't ask. She glanced at the sealed envelope and exhaled through her nose. Please don't make this about principle. It's paperwork, not betrayal. I didn't correct her. I didn't tell her about the entries in the notebook or the way the signature line now looked like a chalk outline. I just picked up the mug beside it and turned it slowly in my hands. She saw the gesture and narrowed her eyes. You've always held on to broken things too long. I opened the refrigerator door and placed the container inside. When I turned back, she was already near the door. Fine. We'll figure it out another way. When the door shut, I returned to the notebook. I added nothing. I simply underlined one line: I no longer lend my name out like spare change. And I let the silence after that sentence stretch wide, like a room no one else had the key to. I never quite understood how silence could feel like a door left open until it did. The envelope was unsealed, folded without crease, addressed in handwriting I hadn't seen in decades, but recognized immediately. Martha never pressed hard with the pen. Her letters always looked like they had been whispered onto the page. Sil, if you're tired, come rest here. The room's still yours. Martha, no explanations, no mentions of holidays, family, or news, just a line written with a trembling hand and no assumptions. I left the postcard on the hallway table beside Robert's old key tray. The brass corners had dulled. I hadn't moved the tray since the week after his funeral. I didn't pack much. A photograph of us from the summer of '72, the one where Robert wore the blue flannel even though it was too hot because I'd said I liked the color. My brown leather notebook, the one with the pages I never tore out. And a ceramic cup with a hairline crack along the handle. I didn't tell Emily. She had sent a group text that morning about refinancing. If Mom can just scan that last signature, we'll close by Thursday. I didn't reply. Instead, I wrote a small note on a torn receipt. Not now. I placed it under the edge of the salt shaker. I didn't know if anyone would look for it or if it would be brushed aside like crumbs. I removed the spare keys from the hook by the door and left the latch resting in place, not locked, just resting. A gesture, not a statement. The ride to Martha's place took 2 buses and a walk past a hardware store that still sold paint cans by the gallon. The gravel crunching beneath my shoes was louder than I expected. I hadn't realized how rarely I walked without a purpose lately. Martha's front porch hadn't changed. The same wind chime made of cutlery, the same green chair with its sun-bleached cushion. She opened the door with a soft smile. No questions, no tilt of the head that asked for stories. Just a nod toward the guest room and a fresh towel laid neatly across the bed. Didn't know what color you liked now, she said, nodding at the blanket folded on the end. I ran my hand across the fabric. Pale yellow, my mother's favorite. I didn't say so. Later that evening, she sliced pears and set them in a dish with a wedge of cheese between them. No plates, no napkins, just 2 forks on a wooden tray and a gesture toward the old porch swing. We didn't speak much. Only once did she look over and say, "Some people think quiet means you've given up. I think it just means you're done performing." I didn't answer. The swing creaked. The pears tasted of late summer. In the morning, I unpacked. Not into drawers, just into space. The photograph leaned against the lamp base. The notebook stayed on the desk. The mug with the cracked handle went beside the sink. When I washed it later, I ran my finger along the break and dried it carefully, even though it never held more than lukewarm tea anymore. No one called that day. No voicemails. No emails with headings in bold red letters. I didn't check the group thread. I opened the notebook and wrote only a date. No summary. Just the act of writing it. By the third evening, Martha placed a folded flannel shirt on the dresser. Blue. Too thick for the weather. She didn't mention Robert. I keep the porch light on in case the power goes out. That was all. I sat on the bed later and remembered the way Robert used to fold his shirt sleeves first, then in half, never in thirds. I folded this one the same way and placed it at the bottom of the drawer. There was a moment just before sleep when I thought about the voicemail I'd heard weeks ago. Nathan's voice, "Mom, you need to move quicker on this stuff. These aren't favors, they're just practical." I had deleted it, but I remembered every word. The bed in Martha's room creaked like the one in my childhood home. The same kind of wooden slats, the same hollow echo when I shifted my weight. I thought of the attic, the trunk full of old scarves, and the way I used to press them against my face to guess who'd worn them. No one here asked who I was trying to be. Martha knocked once before entering the room the next morning. She held out a coffee in a mug that didn't match the others. "Found this in the box you left here back in '89. You always liked the wide handle. The glaze was chipped. A spot on the rim had thinned to the color of bone." I held it carefully and nodded. We sat on the back porch. Her cat circled once around my ankles before deciding I wasn't interesting. "You don't owe anyone a performance," she said, placing her hands flat on her knees. I didn't answer. I looked at the dirt under my nails. I hadn't noticed it before. Later, I opened the notebook and wrote one sentence I didn't leave. I just stopped standing where I wasn't seen. No one needed to read it. I left the door to the guest room ajar that night. Not from carelessness, but because it didn't feel like anything needed sealing. The postcard from Martha still sat on the desk. I hadn't moved it. The crease at the top had started to curl. I pressed it flat and left it uncovered. I used to believe that silence meant agreement. The screen lit up with her name. No picture, no custom label, just Emily. A name floating at the top of the message like it belonged to a stranger. "Are you free this weekend? I need a hand." No punctuation, no greeting. No reference to last year's cancellations, to the dinner I was uninvited to the trust forms with my name removed before I was told. Just need. I placed the phone face down, not to ignore it, just to let the light stop flashing. The surface of the kitchen table remained quiet. The mug beside it had a faint crack along the handle. Not new. I still used it, though. I held it carefully with both hands now. There was a notebook near the edge of the table. Leather-bound soft at the corners, spine, loose from years of being opened and closed without urgency. I flipped to a page marked by a ribbon I had not touched in months. There it was written in blue ink, "If they ever need me again, I'll come." I don't remember what day I wrote that. The handwriting looked steadier than mine feels now. There was no date beside it, no emotion in the words. Just an offering that expected nothing in return. I picked up the same pen I had used then and drew a single line through the sentence. Not a scribble, not an erasure. Just one clean strike, even and final. The kind of line you draw when you no longer feel the need to explain yourself to the page. The kettle had started a slow hiss behind me. Not a whistle yet, just a soft breath building. I moved without thinking, turned off the heat before it reached a boil, and poured it into the small teapot Martha left when she last visited. It was cream-colored, with a hairline fracture at the base and a chip near the lid. Still usable. Still mine. Chamomile today. I hadn't bought anything new. The tin still held enough for a few more cups. I watched the blossoms unfold in the water, pale yellow, softening into warmth. Nothing to do but wait. They always reached out when something needed doing, not when something needed feeling. Never to ask how I'd been, or if the silence in my house had become too much, or if Robert's chair by the window still sat unfilled. Just tasks. The last time it was tax forms. Before that, power of attorney. Before that, a transfer of title that needed my name, only my name, before they could proceed. Emily once said, "It's not a big deal, Mom. Just a quick signature." I had paused, pen in hand, and looked at the line where my name was supposed to go, underneath hers, underneath Nathan's. "It's standard," she said again when I didn't move. I remember placing the pen down on the edge of the table and standing. Maybe not this time. The silence afterward was brief. Then she replied, "You're overcomplicating everything." I never raised my voice. I didn't say she was wrong. I just didn't pick the pen back up. Now the tea had steeped enough. I poured it into the chipped mug and held it, letting the warmth settle into my palms. No rush to drink. The steam curled upward, faint and slow. I glanced at the phone again. No follow-up yet, no apology, no explanation. Just silence, as if I were the one who needed to catch up. In the drawer near the stove, a folded paper with Emily's handwriting still lived beneath a rubber band. It read, "Remember to bring the birth certificate. We need it to enroll Nora." I was not asked if I wanted to be involved, just reminded of my utility. The mug left a faint ring on the table when I set it down. I didn't wipe it away. A message pinged. I let it wait. I opened the notebook again and turned past the crossed-out line to a new page. Today's date. A sentence beneath it. "They remember me when there is labor involved." I didn't add a period. It wasn't the kind of thought that needed closing. I remembered the sound of Martha's voice, not the words, just the tone. The kind you use when handing someone a blanket in the dark. No instruction. No expectation. Just here. Robert used to say, "Let them call when they miss you, not when they need you." I used to think that was unkind. Now I think it might have been the gentlest thing he ever offered. The message blinked again. "Let me know, okay? Let me know." Not, "Would it be okay?" Not, "How are you?" Not, "Is this asking too much?" I picked up the phone, turned it over. I didn't delete the message. I didn't type anything. I just stared at the gray bubbles and the blinking cursor that assumed I would respond. Instead, I pushed the phone an inch away and returned to my tea. Warm. Earthy. A little bitter at the end. On the windowsill sat a bowl with lavender sprigs, dried, brittle, still fragrant. Martha had tied them with twine and left them without a word. I hadn't moved them since. I stood for a while not doing anything, just holding the mug, breathing the air, letting the quiet have its space. I thought about writing back. Maybe. Or not this time. Or even just can't. All options that would invite more requests, more assumptions, more forgetting of the parts that were never mended. Instead, I flipped the notebook closed, pressed my palm gently on the cover, and left it on the table. Then I turned the phone upside down. Not to hide anything, just to stop it from blinking. And I reached for the tin of tea again, not because I needed more, but because I could. I used to sign things automatically. Forms, cards, checks, without thinking where my name ended and someone else's began. The clerk behind the counter looked about 20. He tapped the pen twice on the counter before pushing the slip across. "And the name for the mailbox, ma'am." I held the pen with both hands before writing. not for hesitation, for steadiness. The letters came one by one, Sylvia Ann Whitmore. No hyphen, no Mrs., no middle initial I never liked. Just the name I was born with and the one I chose to keep. He typed it into the screen without comment. We'll print the plate and have it mounted by Wednesday. Anything else you'd like updated? I nodded toward the folders I had brought with me. Electricity, water, broadband. All in my name now. They used to say, joint account emergency contact next of kin. I never read past the first page. Now I read every line. The woman at the utility desk wore a soft wool cardigan buttoned all the way to her neck. She looked up briefly as I handed her my ID. Moving in alone, just me. No dependents, no. She didn't ask for more, just stamped the top right corner and slid it back. The mailbox outside the new gate was still bare, just dull metal under a chipped lid. The kind that made a sharp sound when closed, like it wanted to remind you not everything had to be soft. That night I unpacked slowly. I put the cracked mug above the stove handle, turned inward. I folded the cardigan I had worn on the last Thanksgiving they invited me, still faint with the scent of cinnamon I never mentioned disliking. I didn't bring the china, just a single plate, one spoon, one bowl, a life pared down to what no one had borrowed. A man came by the next afternoon. His sleeves were rolled up over sun-dark arms. Delivery for S.A. Whitmore. He glanced at the name etched on the tiny wood plaque by the porch. Private residence, that's right. He squinted a little, not in suspicion, just mild surprise. You're her I am. He left the box. I signed nothing. No clipboard, no screen. I watched him drive off without turning back. The wind moved the leaves in the ditch without ceremony. Inside the box, tea, a lavender sachet, and a small note in Martha's familiar hand. No need to write back. Just breathe where it's quiet. I placed the sachet beside the kettle. That one I had chosen deliberately. Porcelain. White, but not pure. A faint hairline crack along the spout. The shopkeeper had offered a discount when she saw it. I said no full price. Some things should cost what they cost. The phone lit up around dinner time. Nathan's name, then Emily's. I didn't open either. The messages showed only the preview lines. Just checking if you saw the documents. Mom, we still need the confirmation. Could you please handle it this week? No greeting, no context, not even the illusion of care wrapped in formality. Just task and deadline. I didn't delete them. I just slid the phone under a notepad and finished folding a stack of dish towels. Some still carried faint traces of years past. Stains from blueberry pie, a loose hem initials embroidered by someone else's mother. I kept them anyway. At the grocery store, the cashier looked up at the card when I paid. Whitmore. Any relation to Robert Whitmore the builder used to be. She paused, then scanned the milk. He did our patio years ago. Said it would outlast all of us. I'm sure it will. I carried the groceries home in a single cloth bag. No brands, no logos, just canvas, worn thin at the corners with a tiny stitched edge that had once been white. The house wasn't big, but it didn't echo. I placed my name on every drawer label, not out of vanity, but clarity. No more cupboards someone else might fill. No documents someone else could override. No shared calendar reminders of things I had no say in. A postcard arrived 3 days later, addressed properly. Sylvia Ann Whitmore. No room for assumption. On the back, a sentence in Martha's blocky script. Glad to see your name on the board. I propped it next to the cracked mug. That quiet corner had become a kind of altar, not to grief, not to memory, but to things unspoken. I used to think I would explain myself if asked. Clarify the why, the when, the how it all came apart. Now I understood no one would ask, and I no longer needed to explain. One evening, as I was organizing old envelopes, I found a return address label that still read Mrs. R. Whitmore. The glue had long since dried. I didn't throw it out. I pressed it gently between the pages of an empty notebook, then closed the cover. When I ordered new stationery, I chose ivory paper and ink that bled just slightly on the edge. I kept the signature short, SAW, just the bones of the name. No flourish, no claims. The next time a clerk asked me to spell my name, I didn't pause. I spoke each letter slowly, evenly, without adjusting my tone. Is that all she asked, looking over the form? That's enough. She returned it without further comment. I walked out without checking behind me. The door closed quietly. I didn't write a note. I didn't leave a trail. I was finally where my name belonged. I used to write things down so I wouldn't lose them. Dates, sentences, looks I wasn't sure I had imagined. It didn't stop anything from happening, but it made the forgetting feel less complete. The notebook lay closed for 3 weeks before I opened it again. The leather had softened from use corners, worn spine slightly cracked. It still smelled faintly of old cedar. The last page I wrote on was dated just before the frost came in. I'd recorded the name of the delivery driver who left a box of light bulbs at the wrong door, and a line Emily once said that I couldn't get out of my head. You're the kind of person people forget to thank. I didn't write after that. This morning I cleaned out the writing corner. The dust along the window track had collected around a bent paperclip and an old tea tag dried stiff and curled. I swept the shelf slowly. On the ledge, a chip of plaster from when the wall heater clicked too hard had come loose, resting in a line of sun. I left it where it was. I placed the notebook in the center of the table. No pen, no envelope, no intention. Just the weight of it. Years of observations, each page holding a version of myself who still expected someone might read it and understand. The cover creaked when I opened it. I flipped through the pages with 2 fingers, slow enough to feel the drag of paper across my skin. There were lists of groceries, quotes from voicemail messages, notations about who called and who didn't. One entry read, "Martha dropped off soup. No questions, just heat and eat." Another had only 2 words. "Left early." Some sentences had been underlined in blue ink, others in pencil, as though I was still trying to decide how permanent they should be. In the fireplace, I stacked a small pile of kindling. Nothing dramatic. I didn't tear the notebook apart. I didn't hurl it. I simply held a few pages above the flame and let them go when the edges curled. They lifted and folded inward paper, turning amber and hollow. I watched as handwriting became smoke. Names blackened and disappeared. There was no heat in my hands. Only the sense that I was undoing something I had once thought necessary. No one called. No messages. No interruptions. In the quiet, I folded a piece of cloth that had fallen from the shelf above. It was a handkerchief, white-edged with thin lace, a faint monogram embroidered into the corner. I hadn't used it in years. It smelled of lavender and the back of a drawer. I placed it in the wooden box beside the hearth. Next to it, a half-folded letter Robert once left inside my gardening book. If you're reading this, it means you already know the last line said. His handwriting had shifted by then, thinner, more deliberate each word, like he was carving it in air. I didn't need to read it again. I knew what it said. I knew what it didn't. On the kitchen counter, the kettle began its soft clatter. I let it finish. The steam didn't rush. The sound wasn't urgent. I opened the tin of chamomile and spooned out enough for 1 cup. The mug I chose had a small crack near the handle, but it never leaked. I poured the water slowly and watched the flowers drift. No one teaches you how to stop waiting for something that will never come. You just stop one day, And when nothing arrives, it doesn't surprise you. The mailman knocked once. I didn't go to the door. The only things still delivered in envelopes were bills and advertisements. Anything personal came electronically now, if it came at all. I sat down and placed the notebook's burned spine in the trash. It broke in half as I dropped it, the last remnants falling soundlessly. Beside it on the desk was the thin backing from the notebook's inside cover. The initials pressed faintly in gold leaf still showed S. Whitmore. I traced the letters once, then folded the card in half and slipped it into the drawer without ceremony. There would be no updates, no revisions. Last week, someone asked at the market, "Is this for you or your daughter?" I didn't flinch. I said, "It's for me." I didn't offer an explanation. She didn't ask for one. That's how clarity sounds. It doesn't echo. There are fewer things left to organize now. I keep the pantry stocked with what I know I'll use. I don't buy for visits. I don't freeze extras. There's no one arriving unexpectedly. There's no calendar to clear. Emily hasn't written again. No calls, no messages. Nathan's name hasn't come up in any paperwork. Even the bank statements arrive addressed only to me now. I leave them unopened for days. Eventually, I shred them. I haven't removed their photos, but I've stopped dusting the frames. Martha sent a postcard last month. No return address. Just a line that read, "You don't owe anyone an answer." I pinned it to the side of the fridge. I no longer try to explain what happened. Not to myself, not to others. I don't arrange the story into parts. There's no need to choose where it began or ended. It didn't collapse. It dissolved. I set down my mug after the last sip. There was a ring of tea at the bottom, soft gold, against the ceramic. The fire had burned out. Only a small curl of ash remained barely shaped like a page. I swept it into my palm and walked to the bin. As I dropped it in, I thought about how light the memory had become. Weightless, like something misfiled. I opened the drawer again, checked the folded name card. It hadn't moved. I closed the drawer. I didn't speak aloud. I didn't make a list. I didn't forgive. But I also didn't carry anything forward. And no one would write my name for me again.